The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
Welcome to the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly. I'm Dan Cotter, President of the Chicago Bar Association. Police misconduct is a troubling issue in America. How can we stop it? Are there any solutions? The National Bar Association established a task force to develop strategies to end police brutality. Pamela Means, President of the National Bar Association, is here to discuss this important initiative. Ms. Means is a partner at Thompson Coburn LLP, the largest law firm in St. Louis, Missouri. She was the first African American in the firm's history to be elevated from associate to partner. Ms. Means concentrates her practice in civil litigation. Thank you for joining us, President Means.
Thank you so much for having me, President Cotter.
And we're so glad we worked this out. We go back a long ways to our days at Monmouth College, and so thank you for being here.
We do. We were in undergrad together. Can you imagine that at the same time, we are now leading two of the best bar associations in the country?
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
And Pamela, viewers might not be familiar with the National Bar Association. Can you briefly tell us about it and its history?
Oh, absolutely. The National Bar Association was founded in 1925 at a time when African American lawyers could not join the American Bar Association. You know, those group of lawyers, 11 men and 1 woman, they did something that most lawyers wouldn't even consider today. They didn't stage a protest. They didn't file a lawsuit. They just started their own, and they called it the National Bar Association, and it is the nation's oldest and largest association of color, of lawyers and judges and law students, whose mission is to protect the civil and political liberty of all. The most amazing thing about the Bar Association is its history started with not having access to the ABA, but isn't it wonderful that the leaders that rose up in the American Bar Association, that being Paulette Brown, who's positioned here in Chicago to become the first woman of color president of the ABA, was past president of the NBA. Dennis Archer, the first African-American president of the ABA, was first president of the National Bar Association. So I want to say that we're the training ground for individuals to ensure and to make sure that there is diversity within the legal profession, which I agree with you is a major, major important issue.
It is. It is. And you became the NBA's 72nd president in July 2014. One of your first initiatives was to establish a police misconduct task force. And as you were prioritizing your goals as president, you mentioned President-elect and some of the issues. Why was this at the top of your agenda?
Well, you know, Dan, actually, when I came in as president, it wasn't at the top of my agenda. I had spent my whole bar year setting out 3 major initiatives. One was education as to new civil rights, because we were ending, I was going to be accepting my presidency right at the conclusion of the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Voting rights as a in the profession, because I was going to be, my second part was going to be the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and then diversity on the bench. But 2 weeks before the National Bar Association annual meeting, I had a gentleman call me who was my communications director, and the incident had happened in New York, the Eric Gardner situation. Sure. And he said to me, President-elect Means, what we see in New York is not something that's an anomaly. It is something that is very common. And he said, this is happening around the country. And if African-American lawyers don't do something about this, then the paper on which our degrees are written isn't worth anything. You know, Charles Hamilton Houston, one of the greatest legal minds in our profession, said that a lawyer had the opportunity, the option, either to be a social engineer or a parasite on society. And what the young man, Daryl Washington, said to me is, we need to call a town hall meeting at the NBA annual meeting. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, and we did that. And the gentleman that actually practiced in this area, Dan, began to explain to me about what police brutality was. I had a 28-year veteran prosecutor from Santa Monica, California, named Terry Wiley, who was telling me about it from the ends of being a prosecutor. And then Daryl Washington, a 23 veteran who had represented victim families. And they began, Dan, to lay out why this was an issue. And at that meeting, in 3 days, we made that my fourth initiative.
And it seems like it's become a
It's
top
become
initiative.
it's become the number one initiative. Yes, I agree.
And as we've seen daily, and just this week again, we see a lot of depictions of police brutality. And you talked about some of the studies and some of the information that was coming into you. Can you lay the foundation for what's happening in this country and what's the nature of the problem and the extent of it?
Absolutely. Dan, if we look at the cases that are happening around the country today, what we really see is on camera what has been happening for years. The issue of police brutality is not something that America has dealt with in 2005 or 2015 and 2014. But this was an issue that was plaguing the African American community back in the 1960s. Contrary to popular belief, the reason the Black Panthers was formed was because police was terrorizing African American communities. In the 80s, we heard rappers rapping about police brutality. But Dan, in those situations, it was easier for us to shoot the messenger than to hear the message. Then something happened called video cameras and cell phones. Individuals started to tape and place on social media acts of police brutality. We've heard all our lives that African American gentlemen saying, I can get pulled over by the cops and the cops harass me, whether they're teenagers, lawyers, doctors, that there is a profiling that happens. Most of us, and even in my community, Dan, found it very difficult to believe. And if we're being honest with each other, we surely said, surely the police is not treating individuals that way. Surely you must have done something. But if you see it with your own eyes, it's kind of hard to deny what you see with your eyes. And as we began to see the images on social media, it became very clear to me that this was not just a Black issue. African American men are 9 times more likely to be shot by the cop, but this was an American issue. Because cops have an obligation, they work for us, right, not opposite. They have an obligation to protect and preserve those individuals, the communities that they're in. And what we can't find, Dan, is the exact numbers that are happening with police brutality because there's no national database. Right. And so one of the things we decided is that we needed to be able to save lives. And as we went from state to state to state, we found so many cases of police brutality. When we first started this initiative, Dan, one thing I targeted my group with doing is we can't fix everything in 1 year. So pick out 25 states that we would concentrate on. The National Bar Association, the goal was, as they said to me, I said, how about we do this? Why can't we call Attorney General Holder, at that time he was the Attorney General, sure, and tell him this problem is going on and he needs to fix it? They said, President-elect mean it doesn't work that way.
Why not?
The federal government can't just come in and arbitrarily investigate a particular police department. It has to have evidence that there is a practice and a pattern and a procedure to what is being done of different treatment. So what we decided to do was we picked 25 states and we concentrated on states that had a high population of African Americans and that had reported cases that we could find on the internet, a high reporting of cases, and we zeroed in on those states. We then said we would send open records requests to those states, and the purpose of that was to get data for the last 5 years that we can compile, put a report together, and then be able to submit that report to the Attorney General and say, here are some states that you should look at, police departments, and open up practice and procedure investigations similar to what they did in Ohio, similar to what they did in California, and what they did in Ferguson. And that was part of the goal. I then said to the 2 gentlemen that was going to chair the commission, I said, look, we can't just talk about the problem. What happens to the young kids who are dying as we're researching this and being lawyers? I said, let's go do some know your rights, because it could save your life. So one of the things we did is say, if you're going to target a community, you have to be willing to go into that community and be able to teach the community how to interact with the officers and how also educate them on the danger that is out there. In addition, so that we looked at that problem and we found and we said to ourselves, look, police officers are similar to judges. they have the ability to hold in their hands whether or not a person could live or die or have a future in America. And in those two professions, it matters most. If we don't have impropriety, we at least have the appearance of it. And so that was our goal.
And that's a pretty weighty responsibility for these police.
Oh, yeah.
And to serve and protect, as you said. And what was the reception in these 25 states that you went to? Were people open to your message and to working together and sitting down at the table to find solutions?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the states, I would say some of the states they were, some of they were not. What we always did when we went into a community is we tried to bring in the community leaders that were there, individuals who had practiced in this area, both from the prosecution standpoint and from the defense, from the family representation. We also invited law enforcement to be a part of the panels because I believe you can't have a real conversation unless you have everyone at the table. And one of my rules is you don't attack. We have a conversation and we learn to respect that. Don't mean we don't get heated because most of all, I may be a lawyer, but at the heart of it, I'm a mother. Sure. And I'm a mother of four, a 14-year-old, a 9, a 6, and a 4. And I always approached it from that perspective. And I have one son. We went into these communities, and I would say there are some communities similar to Philadelphia, West Virginia, where officers were really interested in what could they do in order to ensure that their police departments had a working relationship with the public, and what could they do to ensure that they rebuild the trust. But I will tell you, there were other communities that I went into that really talked about and wanted to deal with the issue of the broken windows theory and policing based on that. And I don't know if you know about that. If you
Explain a little bit.
Well, it came out of New York, and it's the Rudy Giuliani theory. And it says that if you stop a person from committing a minor crime, okay, then you will then have the opportunity to permit and prevent somebody from committing a major crime. And that's the rationale that they use with the Eric Garner situation is if you stop him from selling these cigarettes on the street, then we can prevent him from breaking into someone's home. Doesn't work.
Right.
And sometimes what we do is we focus on issues instead of we focus on side issues instead of focusing on the real issue. So I'll say I went into Arkansas, and the police chief got up and said he had only been in the community for 5 months. And he got up and he said, Dan, he said, I'm sick and tired of you guys talking about police brutality. You ought to take care of the issues in your own backyard. You ought to stop chasing sensationalism, hopping on buses, going where there is the act of the day, and you ought to take care of black on black crime because I'm tired of scraping your children off the ground. Now, Dan, you look at me and you say, whoa, that was a black cop that said that.
It's amazing.
It was an African-American cop. I went to Jackson, Mississippi, and I had a cop say, at these Know Your Right forums we go to, we actually pass out and give to individuals their constitutional rights on a little tiny card. And we explain to them the things they need to do, the things the law doesn't require them to do, how it is different whether you're being detained or not being detained. And the cop got up after me, the sheriff did, and he said, I disagree with everything the president of the National Bar Association said. And if I pull you over, I don't want you litigating your rights with me. I want you shutting up and doing whatever I tell you, whether I have a right to pull you over or not, whether you're a child or a lawyer. Dan,
wow.
That was an African-American sheriff. And I have said that in this issue, Dan, this issue is about the color blue. And black and white just makes it worse. And so we've seen communities, I've seen cops around the country saying, what can we do to partner and work together? And I've seen other cops say, our life is on the line every day, and we have to go out there and protect communities, and we're only responding to individuals when they ask us to come into their homes. And I try to make it clear, Dan, that the National Bar Association does not have a war against police departments or officers. Sure. We have a war against bad policing and bad police officers.
Sure. And one of the things you talk about videotaping and social media, and one of the things that's been surprising to me, and maybe you can comment on it, is that there are some postings and some strong defend at all costs the integrity of the cops or the jobs they're doing, right? And that it's, again, the broken window or something else.
Yeah.
And are you surprised that there's so much of that still, and in light of the daily evidence we see on TV and the media?
I'm not. And let me tell you why I'm not surprised, Dan, because I think as a country, and that's what we are, we're a nation of individuals who are connected by our love for America. And I think one failing that we have is we've never really dealt with the issue of race. And we've never really dealt with implicit bias. And we've never really dealt with overt racism. And the elephant that sits in the room that we won't deal with is that. And sometimes people get so angry that that implicit bias shows itself and they don't even realize. So I'm not surprised, because I've been trying to force my friends on both sides of the aisle, both black and white, to have a real honest conversation. Sure. Individuals who break laws should not be defended for breaking laws, but individuals that break laws should not be sentenced to death for breaking laws. Right. And there's a balance in that. And I think I'm not surprised by it, because I think that we don't ever in life want to paint any profession or any group of people with a single brush. Not all cops are bad. Right. Not all white people are racist. Not all black people are uneducated. Not all black folks are ignorant, or criminals, or drug dealers. And I think what happens sometimes, though, is individuals who defend the cops have no problem painting the African American community with one brush, right, but become very offended when someone paint police with one brush. And what I say to people in that instance is, when you're dealing with the issue of black on black crime, what we're ignoring, and if you apply the broken windows theory to that, is you're ignoring the most recent FBI statistics that say black on black crime is on a decline, and white on white crime is on an incline. Right. And so if that theory applies, why don't we see an over-policing in white communities? I say over-policing based on that is not logical. I don't want to see whites die at the hand of bad officers, Hispanics, Asians, or African Americans. But if you protect the least of them, then you protect the great of them. And I think when we are able to have that honest conversation and deal, and I understand your issues from your perspective, teach you about who I am, you teach me about who I am, we'll see less of those kind of posts on the internet, more of a defense of individuals, and we will talk about what is right. I just had a press conference yesterday, and a reporter asked me, she said, don't you think this is a great teachable moment to teach African American children how to respect officers? And I said to her, I think this is a great teachable moment. What happened in McKinney, this is a great teachable moment to teach Americans how to respect each other, mutual respect. Because if you look at the two officers that we do see on the video screen in the McKinney case, and I know the nation has to be talking about it right now. There is one officer, white officer, who's having a conversation with the young people. Right. The young people aren't disrespecting him. They aren't yelling at him. They actually look like they're just regular children. Then you have this other officer who's acting like a child, and you have children acting like a child with the child. Right. And that's the difference. The respect, because there's a saying in the community, it says to get respect, you have to give respect. Right. And that's what we see. And so, no, Dan, I don't find it shocking to see it. What I find it disappointing that we refuse to deal with it. I find it disappointing that when people do express how they feel, that they're afraid, right, if they're white, that they will be labeled as racist, or that some people are insensitive enough to know that it will hurt what is said. I do think we have to have an environment where we are able to have the discussion to find the solutions, because, you know, police brutality just doesn't happen, you know, to individuals on the street. You know, based on what the Chicago Bar Association has done with its foundation, that the wives of police officers are abused consistently, constantly, and those are not reported because they are afraid, or when they go to report it, the officers under the thin blue line protect those officers even from their wives. Right. You're right, we do need a conversation on it, and unfortunately it hasn't taken place. And we do need that conversation.
Let's turn a little bit to, we talked about police and just like any group of people, they're not all bad or good. What kind of processes do applicants for police go through currently in general? And what's the steps that they take so that the public may not be aware of what they do or don't go through?
Right. Well, it different. There is no national standard for police. They go through a police academy. There are some states that require that you go through a mental health testing, and the standard for the mental health testing is different from states to states. We'll talk about it later on, but one thing we found is that with respect to the testing that they go through, you can find as many online tests that teach you how to take the test to pass the test. And so sometimes it may not catch what it needs to, but they will go through training. Their training teaches them how to defend, not to protect people's civil liberties. So when I talk to officers, they will tell you, when they approach someone and they pull you over in a traffic stop, they are actually trained to actually respond and defend. So you'll see a cop, when he gets out of his car, he will immediately put his hand on the gun. Any movement by an individual will make that cop feel like as if he has to respond to what is going on. And so they're trained in that vein. So we see that kind of training. We see training, that is related to, how to deal, in difficult, stressful situations, how to deal when pressure is on and how you should respond. And those are all done in the academy. And then the training. There is some race training that happens, but it is not, there's no consistent type of race training. Sometimes it could be as small as, a class talking about the differences in who we are and how we should not have those differences. But there's nothing that really gets to the heart of who and the issues that we talked about earlier that we need to deal with.
And why, it sounds generally like the current filtering and applicant process is not adequate. Why is it not adequate?
Well, if we look at the issues that we're looking at now, I think it may be adequate for the defense side, the protection side. Officers are trained that, we used to say to officers, look, why won't you shoot somebody in their leg or their arm? And they said they are trained to shoot for the mass, shoot for the part that will be able to stop. So they're trained in being able to be effective. The part that is inadequate is what we're seeing playing out. We don't have enough training dealing with race relations and implicit biases. We don't have enough training dealing with how to de-escalate a situation in an environment where you already may have some preconceived notions of how a community is. Also, at the National Bar Association, one of the things we focused on is that there being mandatory mental health testing, because a lot of officers who are on the force, some of them come out of the Army, and God bless those individuals who have chosen to actually go serve us. But sometimes as a country, we don't protect and preserve and don't protect them. And sometimes they deal with issues that we need to give them help with. And we need to make sure that there's adequate testing to weed out, not weed in, but to weed out individuals who may not be ready to be on the force. For instance, the gentleman who shot the young man in Ohio. Okay. He worked for a police department prior to. That police department fired him because they said that he was not street ready. That was in his file. Right. Yet he was hired by this other police department that never ever really kind of checked his former file. So I also say part of the hiring process needs to be, you need to vet the candidates a little more to ensure what is there.
And is there, in all your visits, the 25 states and the substantial work that you and the NBA have done this year, have you found any state or any police force that's going through mental health and doing it well that you can point to?
No.
No.
We haven't found one state, and that's the reason why one of the things, as a part of our solution, I told you, one, we did the open records request. Right. Second, we do the Know Your Right class. Sure. On sessions that we do, the forums. The third thing is we have written laws that we want passed on the local, the state, and the federal level. In one law, we have put on the local level stricter mental health testing. And we say stringent because, again, as I stated earlier, only judges and police officers have the ability and hold a person's life in their hand. And there has to be some appearance of impropriety. And so you want to get at the core of what the person is thinking, how they're feeling to deal with that issue.
Right. And a lot of it sounds like it should go back to what's on a lot of police cars throughout the country, right? Serve and protect.
Yes. See, you have it. That's exactly right. What an honor to have individuals do that. I applaud the men in blue and the women in blue who put their lives on the line every day. I applaud the men and women who actually do de-escalation very well. I applaud the officers who, the young man, remember, who went into the theater and he shot up, he had saw the Batman movie, he shot up a bunch of individuals in that location. But the cops didn't shoot him down. They calmed him down. Remember the gentleman that went into the U.S. Congresswoman, the white man?
Right.
He went into the U.S. Congresswoman, shot her, killed a federal judge and a little girl. The cops didn't shoot him down. They calmed him down. Those cops understood and knew something about de-escalation. And they also didn't have a bias toward the group of individuals that were there. They didn't automatically look at them as a criminal. And if we have more cops like that are in diversity areas, then that's what is much needed.
I agree. President Means, thank you for informing us about the National Bar Association's important initiative to end police misconduct. I'm Dan Cotter. Thank you for watching the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly.